Today, I have the great pleasure of talking to two friends who live and work nearby here in the Napa Valley. Beth Novak, with her family, is the owner of Spottswoode Vineyard, one of the most famous vineyards and wine estates in the Napa Valley. And Aron Weinkauf is her long-term now winemaker. Aron, you've been with Spottswoode for has to be at least a decade, perhaps more.
Pretty much
So
too.
Almost 2 decades. He started
almost two. That's great.
2006.
So winemakers always say that you have to learn the vineyard. Do you think you've learned the vineyard at almost 2 decades, or are you just getting started?
I always joke that every year that goes by, I know less and less.
I could apply to all of us, maybe. Well, I'm so happy to talk with you today, and thank you both also for being supporters of Share and Pair Sundays and Come Over October, our wine advocacy campaigns. We're really grateful to have all of your hard work behind us. And so I want to start out.
And of course, likewise, Karen.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, putting forth these initiatives at a time when we definitely need to be telling the positive story of wine and what we do and wine growing. And just one thing, while Aron is a winemaker, he's really our wine grower. He's a winemaker and vineyard manager. So he farms the grapes, where a lot of his time, effort, and mental capacity is spent, and also makes the wine. So just to say that he's responsible for the entirety.
And that makes so much sense. In fact, let's start there, because one of the things that we know about Spottswoode and about both of you is that you are very strongly committed to environmental advocacy. You walk the walk. You don't just talk the talk. You've been at the forefront of every environmental initiative I can think of. And, it's always seemed to me a little surprising that anyone could not be strongly an advocate for how we treat the land and the environment around us, because on the one hand, wineries, are always talking terroir, that their wine tastes the way it does because of this place. If that's the case, it would seem like you have to protect that place. You have to care for that place.
I completely agree with you. I mean, I have felt for a long time, and Aron can speak to this as well, that we should be incredibly responsible stewards of our land, and that we do here in the Napa Valley. We should be leading. And while we tout ourselves as leaders, and I may not make a lot of friends saying this among my all of my peers here in the Napa Valley, my colleagues, we're not doing as good a job as we could, and I think we should do better. And I hope that there is an economic reality and reason for doing so. When you look at taking care of the environment, we are an agriculturally based industry, and taking care of our land ensures the long-term viability of what we're doing here. I think that sometimes is lost to habit and to the way things are done, and Aron would have a different perspective.
Yeah, you feel like you see it in everything we do. A lot of our resources and natural resources are things that, because of their constance and presence and availability, we oftentimes take them for granted, and obviously there's eventual consequences to it, but oftentimes those consequences are not so immediate either. So we're pretty slow to learn and adapt.
Why is wine important to each of you, Beth?
For me, I was raised here since I was 11, and I somehow started to recognize the importance of it to me when I was lucky enough to study abroad in Salzburg, Austria, a year away from UCLA. And I think that all of a sudden recognizing that historic connection to land, I mean, of course I could legally drink, that was a benefit, we could. Recognize, and you think you're sophisticated when you live in Europe, even though I can assure you I was not. But I think that ability to to tie that to tie wine to site is and to this history is something that is so unique, and somehow you're tasting a place again, to go back to your talk about terroir and the importance thereof. So for me, wine just became very important to me, and then that passion grew when I started selling wine after I graduated from university with no thought of coming back to Napa Valley, and then ultimately started working with my mom in 1987. Wine is just integral. I honestly cannot imagine, and you've written a lot about this, Karen, because I read what you write, but to imagine even a meal without it. I have wine with dinner every single night. Whether I am alone, because sometimes I'm happily at home alone, and other times I am with others, wine is just a part of it. I can't imagine it not being. It's just a part of my life.
Yeah. No, I so feel that myself. I feel that even when you're like me, you're a consumer, you don't make wine, you don't you don't own a winery, you're not you still participate, for me, you participate in nature every day by taking that wine into you. I can picture the vineyard. I think of all the hard work you do. I think of what a blessing, in a sense, wine is, that it is so true. It in a world, sometimes I think the world is, mechanized to madness. You can barely get out of your pajamas without your cell phone. But here's something so precious. For 8,000 years, vines have grown, given us berries, been turned into wine. And then it's a way that we connect with other people. I mean, it's astounding to me that there's anyone who is not in love with wine, frankly.
Well, and it also, and that, Aron, I'll give you a chance, but it also transports you. I mean, you're alluding to that, just not you. It transports you to another place, to another time. It takes your mind to, yeah, you sit and you contemplate and you think about where that came from, what went into it, where they were grown. I'll open up, you look at a map, it's like, where is that place? Where is that vineyard in this place? It's incredible how opening it is, how enlivening it somehow is.
Totally. Yeah. Aron, why is wine important to you?
Well, I obviously agree with everything you guys have said. For me, also, it's always funny as alcohol and other things get called into question because, of course, we've evolved as humans with fermented beverages. It's been an absolute necessity throughout our entire evolutionary history, um, and and nowadays, in the modern sense, as you guys say, it can transport you. It can tell a story, and from kind of my perspective as a farmer, wine is really important right now because it is one of the only areas within the food industry where we have a direct link as a producer to a consumer. And so to tell the story of the farming, to tell the story of the necessity of environmental conservatorship, to tell the story of the seasons, the challenges, the plight of the modern day farmer, and despite some of the nuances with the wine industry, it is still absolutely 100% dependent on farming, and it has such a unique role within our food system.
What you're saying, Aron, reminds me that um, it's important that when people, I mean, we're lucky that people visit wineries. Not everyone goes and visits, I don't know, a tomato farm, let's say. But when you visit a winery, you really, in many ways, you are exposed to the whole concept of farming, of caring for the land. And I think you start to think about wine in a very different way. Um, it's certainly the reason I moved from New York to Napa Valley was I just felt that through osmosis, being close to vineyards would make me a better writer. And And it's true. I mean, it seemed sort of magical at the time, but I think that is true. And I'm so happy when I see people visiting wineries because I think not only are they learning about that wine, but something deeper is happening, some connection to, oh, I see. It brings us back. It brings us back to nature and to a sense of humility in the face of nature.
Yeah, the old salt of the earth saying, I believe wholeheartedly that the more connected to the natural rhythms and cycles of the seasons of Mother Nature, the healthier we as individuals are.
Absolutely. Well, let's taste some Spottswoode wine. I have mine right here.
Okay.
This, we're going to start with your Sauvignon Blanc, which, as you know, is a favorite of mine. This is the 2024
A baby.
Sauvignon Blanc. Um, and so, excuse me, why, this sounds like a funny question, I suppose, but why do you make Sauvignon Blanc?
When we first moved here, in my family, my mom and dad, when they bought Spottswoode in 1972, we replanted an old post-prohibition vineyard. So there is history here. It was actually originally planted in 1882. But when we moved here in the early 70s, it was a post-prohibition vineyard. My dad had sold his medical practice, replanted a vineyard thanks to having some neighbors like Rick Foreman and others. So of the 40 acres that are basically vineyard, we planted about 9 acres each of Sauvignon Blanc and Zinfandel, and then about 20 acres of Cabernet in the back. And so ultimately, after my father died in the meantime of a heart attack, and my mother thankfully stayed, founded the winery in 1982 and brought founding winemaker Tony Soder on board, who set really the tone for Spottswoode right from the start. He made just Cabernet Sauvignon from what was out in the vineyard in 1982 and 1983. And then in 1984, he added Sauvignon Blanc. We made our first commercial release, if you will, of Sauvignon Blanc in 1984. So that was our start with Sauvignon Blanc. We brought organic farming to Spottswoode in 1985, thanks to Tony, but that's off topic. And so we started making Sauvignon Blanc then and absolutely fell in love with it. And since that time, our grape sourcing has changed. So our vineyard, we started replanting in the early 1990s due to phylloxera. The Sauvignon Blanc was the first acreage to be removed and where we replanted Cabernet Sauvignon. At that moment, we made the decision, are we going to continue to make Sauvignon Blanc? The answer was yes. We started buying fruit from old family farmers here in Napa Valley, the Fredianis, the Toffanellis, and the Hydes. We still buy from the Hydes and the Toffanellis, amazingly, all these years later. The Fredianis don't have Sauvignon Blanc on their land anymore. At any rate, we started making it from purchased fruit, and then ultimately now we've added different vineyards, and Aron can bring it into the current era. But that's how we started. It was my mom's favorite wine. Really, she had the largest allocation every year, and helped. There was one year we ran out for her, and she was not happy. So that never happened again. And so we've it's just a variety. We absolutely love Sauvignon Blanc. It's just so interesting. It's complex. It's dynamic. It's fascinating. It just has so many layers. And Aron, you should take it from there because you've brought it into and carried it forward for almost 20 years.
Well, as Beth just said, as I came on board, Mary had only one expectation, and that was that the Sauvignon Blanc be good, and she had her stylistic preference also. So that was always the biggest priority. And yeah, I think for me and what I feel I see from our team when we do all of our comparative tastings, etc., is just, this Sauvignon Blanc is such an aromatic varietal. It can be diverse. It can be highly reflective of terroir, as we see in New Zealand or the Loire, Sancerre, etc. And it's just one of those. It can have such a range of complexities, textures, aromatics that I find it an extremely enjoyable, dynamic, and at the same time kind of intellectually stimulating varietal. So I see it from that side of things, and of course, try to make one that's just good and fresh, um, and representative of our California terroir.
You know, people don't realize perhaps that it is it has more range, Sauvignon Blanc, than almost any other variety. I mean, Chardonnay is only made in a few places. Cabernet is only made in a few places. Think of all the places where Sauvignon Blanc is well known. Bordeaux, the Loire, South Africa, Austria, Northern Italy,
Yep.
California, New Zealand, Australia. I mean, it is, if you ever want to do a really great tasting for yourself, everyone who's listening, just get a Sauvignon Blanc from, let's say, 10
All
places
of
in
those
the
places.
world. It is so reflective of its place. I used to do a tasting like that at the Culinary Institute of America when I was heading up their wine program. And it was my favorite day to teach because we had Sauvignon Blancs literally from all over the world. And when we did Chardonnay tastings, there were maybe 4 main countries.
Mhm.
But in fact, I forgot to put in Chile is well known for Sauvignon Blanc as well. So it transcends all kinds of hemispheres and countries. And, you know, I'm thinking that in 1984, when you would have started, it was a time when not many, when I think the consumer reaction to California Sauvignon Blanc wasn't particularly good. There were a lot of not very good Sauvignon Blancs on the market at that time, and also Sauvignon Blanc didn't sell for very much, which made it a you know self-perpetuating kind of of cycle. And it took wineries who were really committed, such as yourselves, to change that cycle and to make really great Sauvignon Blanc and to get people to realize, oh, this is a great variety.
Yeah, and to commit to it because interestingly, most people when we arrived here and then started making wine, it was Cabernet and Chardonnay, which really makes no sense, right? In
Makes no
that,
sense.
but it's just what people were making. People are like, why are you making Sauvignon Blanc or why are you making Chardonnay? Well, we're not making Chardonnay because we're not interested in it, and we're making Sauvignon Blanc because we love it. And so it's been fun to be a part of bringing this variety to the fore. Because I think what we're doing, I mean, Aron could tell you, but the amount of care that goes into this wine, literally each year over 200 separate fermentations, because all of this is fermented in small stainless barrels, French oak barrels, and then a couple of cement eggs or cuves, one ceramic egg, and one amphora. And so there are so many interesting sort of spices in that spice rack, as you put it, Aron. It's something that you should speak to because it adds its. This is again a great amount of care that goes into this wine. It is not fermented in a large stainless tank. It has so much more, and that's something that you can speak to, Aron, what you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. Enjoy kind of on the winemaking side that winemaker spice rack, as Beth's alluded to, with the myriad fermentations. We are always playing around with yeasts and other things. But the greater target of still maintaining that aromatic complexity, not overshadowing that, and supporting that with real body and viscosity is always something that we strive for, we enjoy, and we think it contributes to a wine that unfortunately probably gets drank very quickly most of the time, but is also surprisingly age-worthy because it really is dynamic. And to watch Sauvignon Blancs age and evolve, whether it's in the glass momentarily or over 10, 15 years is really can be pretty exceptional and a real treat. And we happen to be
Yeah.
lucky enough to have a couple old bottles laying around that we get to taste periodically.
But even if you didn't age it, I mean, which of course lots of people don't, I think what I love is the the sort of line of freshness And I've come over the last few years to think freshness is very different, or at least it may be related to acidity, but it's not necessarily only acidity. Um, I'm not entirely sure where freshness comes from, but man, does it feel good, right? It feels clean and dynamic and alive in your mouth, in your body. So Aron, let me go back to you on that. Where does freshness come from?
Well, I think in
Let me ask you the easy questions. Go ahead.
yeah, no,
Teasing you.
it's funny because I was literally just having this conversation with someone else yesterday because a lot of it I think is oftentimes tied to aromatics. And even if we may not focus on it so much in a very kind of innate natural fashion as we're tasting and just enjoying wines, it's it's a very ingrained part of our human function in a sense. And so, we don't necessarily think about that. But for example, when I mentioned something that's say a resinous aromatic, and you can go to something that's going to be very fresh, almost like an alfalfa grass juice, and you can smell like there's a sweetness to it, there's a freshness to it, there's a crispness to it, there's a vibrancy to it. And then kind of on the opposite side, you could look at the kind of dried herbs. Those can be equally as resinous, but we are very aware that those are not fresh. They are dried. They have a warmth to them. They don't have the freshness to them. And I think that sense and what all of the aromatics and the history of that wine is up until that point in time conveys that. We know that innately. And I think it's tied to that.
Mm, okay. Yeah. Well, wherever freshness comes from, it certainly is an enormous positive in wine, and not just because it's so delicious and excites your sense of aroma, but also because it's helpful with food. I mean, wines that have freshness create that nice seesaw. Take a bite of the food, you want a sip of the wine makes you want a bite of the food, and there you are. Let's go to your Cabernet. I'm going to taste your.
I'm just going to add quickly to that, Karen, just because I think from a grower side, it does also bear mentioning that it is something that can be very fleeting and very delicate. And so our efforts to preserve it, whether it be on the winemaking or when we decide to make our picks, can be extremely important because as fruit gets riper, it is something that oftentimes does disappear. And so there's really a pretty fine window there in which you have truly ripe fruit before it then transitions on to something that is not as fresh. And it's something that's so important to us in the red and the white winemaking, in our belief of style and our belief of ageability, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that I mentioned that and interrupt you.
Yeah.
So sorry.
Yeah, no, it's an important point that freshness can be sacrificed very easily, very quickly. It can go, and then the wine doesn't seem very alive any longer on your palate, and you get tired drinking it. And yeah. And I agree. Thank you for pointing out. We're going to taste your Cabernet. I agree. One of your Cabernets. This is the Lindenhurst 2022. But I agree that is true for red wine as it is for white wine. Yeah. So tell
And
me about Lindenhurst.
So Lindenhurst, I'll speak to that. This is a wine that we started making in 2002. And originally it was sort of a classic declassified Spottswoode. 2002 was our first sort of aha year when it was very hot at harvest. Rosemary, hot and dry. Rosemary Cakebread was making the wines and really felt like there were lots from that year that she did not want to put into Spottswoode because they did not have that freshness, that sense of aliveness, because it had gotten hot. We hadn't been able to bring everything in as quickly as we would have liked, so there was some raisoning. We don't we don't want those types of flavors. And so she made some very severe selections to make the very best Spottswoode 2002, and we had some lovely wine left over. And we had actually always had wine left over because not everything makes it into the final blend. We farm everything as best we can to make sure that to give it the best opportunity. But so in 2002 in particular, we had, again, she had been selling a lot of wine on the bulk market each year and had eager buyers. And she said, we really should be bottling this because it's really good. And the demand for it is high. So we decided to start making this wine. We called it Lindenhurst because it was one of the former names of the Spottswoode estate. It was named Lindenhurst after some beautiful linden trees that are still existing on the property. And from 1908 until 1910. And in 1910, it was named Spottswoode. So we started making this wine, again, as a classic declassified wine in 2002. And then over time, and Aron, you came on not too long thereafter, we started bringing in outside fruit so that we could make a wine every year. We could have a certain, at least minimum, a level of production, because of course in any given vintage we have higher production, we have lower production. There was no consistency, and so we wanted to achieve that, and we felt like it was wise to start working with outside growers, and we had experience with that because of what we do with the Sauvignon Blanc, and so we started doing that. And then Aron, so that's the genesis of the brand, and then Aron, you can take it from there.
Aron, how would you describe the style of Lindenhurst compared to the estate Cabernet?
Good question.
Okay, I'm gonna touch on a couple of things. One, I think Beth, correct me, but I think even the first few iterations of Lindenhurst actually had young vine on the front label of the Lindenhurst, because it was also 2002. Our last major replant really happened in 1998. So 2002 really would have been kind of the first foray into some of these last new vineyards coming into the picture. So it's very much been just a constant evolution, which kind of moves us forward to, as Beth mentioned, by 2009, we were buying fruit to help build up and stabilize the quantity of production for the Lindenhurst. And really, what really became immediately obvious to us was we really needed to have it be its own wine. And so we went out and began sourcing from really exceptional little vineyards and growers that we had found across the valley to really help build a truly unique wine. And within our goals of stylistically knowing that we weren't going to be farming it ourselves, and knowing what our stylistic goals of maintaining quality and balance and freshness, oftentimes sought out vineyards with just unique exposures, really beautiful balance, different climatic conditions. So we have, a little vineyard in Howell Mountain. We have a vineyard that we've been working with for a long time down in the Oak Knoll district. Really, and then the other component of that is because we are not tethered to what we do and have planted here on the property, is we do purchase all 5 of the traditional Bordeaux varietals, specifically with the idea that the Merlot and Malbec, for example, can bring in a nice fruitiness, a little bit of a softer, less firm tannin, and just something that's going to be juicy, fruity, because we always say the Lindenhurst is the wine you drink as you're waiting for your Spottswoode to age and mature. And so it was really that goal of making just a beautifully structured wine, but that still had great fruit complexity, still maintained and allowed us to maintain the freshness, the aromatics, the vibrancy within the wine. And I would say, obviously, it's a mix of vineyards, but it's very much a representation of what we're capable of within the valley.
So Aron mentioned Merlot and Malbec. Those 2 varieties are not grown in our estate. So our estate cab is Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, and Petit Verdot, generally in that order. And so the Lindenhurst does have all 5 of them.
What this is making me think about is the issue of seamlessness, because I think most people, well, certainly me, I hear, well, a wine has this and this, and I begin to visualize layers like, oh, this could add this could add this. I start to construct how I think it might work in my mind. But in point of fact, when you drink wine, what you want is to not be able to do that. You want it to seem very seamless. So that it doesn't seem, I don't know, the word comes to mind as disjointed or discombobulated somehow. And when you watch someone, one of the reasons I love to sometimes go to restaurants by myself is so that I can kind of sit at the bar, eat something simple, but watch people when they're drinking. How long are they spending with that sip of wine? Do they smell it? Do they not? And one of the things I sometimes see is when a wine is effortless to drink, when it is seamless, you see people just, I don't know, it's like the wine is just flowing. It's a wonderful, I can't describe it better than this, but it's a wonderful thing to see and to also experience seamlessness. So, Aron, my question for you is, when you are doing a blend, and I'm assuming that a small group of you get together and do the blend, is there a moment when you're blending percentages when you say, there it is, it's obvious, this is the blend? Or
as you alluded to, we do blend in a small group. I know Beth sits in with us. A couple of the other people on the winemaking team sit in together, and we have one perfumist that we've always kind of enjoyed as an outside perspective, sitting in with us. And so it's what we always work towards. We always work towards consensus. And as you're talking about, seamlessness, I also think of another S word, synergistic, because it's always funny as we're going through and we're blending, and you see how it's not always a 1 + 1 = 2 scenario during the blending process. It really is about the synergies and the balance points across, whether it be varieties, structures, acidities. And so it's always really fun to just kind of be able to, I always say, you kind of you go into it with an objective, but then you kind of try to remove yourself so you can continually let the wine tell you where it actually needs to go. Yeah, because I agree. The synergies, the seamlessness, the balance of a wine is really part of its beauty.
beautifully said. Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for making these beautiful wines, for joining me today, for being supporters of Share and Pair Sundays and Come Over October. This coming Sunday is going to be Easter, and I can just imagine this Lindenhurst with some roast lamb right now. I'm going to make myself hungry even thinking about it. So thank you both so very much. Beth Novak, Aron Weinkauf, thank you.
Thank you for having us, and we really appreciate everything you do for our industry and for Napa Valley and the overall industry. So thank you. We are very fortunate to have you here.
Agreed. Thank you again.